Welcome to a special Christmas Eve rendering of the Gaggle live stream. Christmas Eve. So, Merry Christmas, everybody who is here. And for once, just in the spirit of Christmas, I won't do the usual thing of complaining about the dismal, gray, miserable, awful, drab, insufferable lack of light and hope um, of these December days. And I use the word day very loosely. I won't do it. In the spirit of Christmas, I will be upbeat and wishing everybody a very happy season and a very happy time to celebrate and enjoy whatever one can of life. So, in that spirit, welcome everybody. It's now, I guess, 3:10 p.m. on the east coast of the United States. So, it's still kind of early afternoon, so to speak, of Christmas Eve. So here it's already evening, and of course, with our friends down under, they're already into Christmas Day. So it's a rolling holiday. Um, the kind of a couple of interesting things. The report, the ethics committee report on Matt Gates has been published, and Darren O'Leary says it's just gone 8 p.m. in the UK. Yeah, that's right. It's 8 p.m. in the UK, but still, it's ready Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve. So, for those, I mean, Christmas Eve used to be a very special day. I mean, in my family, I think it used to be the custom, which is that you would have something special to eat on Christmas Eve, and you would exchange presents on Christmas Eve. So on the evening of Christmas Eve, so out comes the tree. You bring out the tree, you decorate it on Christmas Eve. You don't do it before Christmas Eve. It has to be on Christmas Eve. And then under the tree, you put your presents, and of course, you always have to have your baby Jesus on by your Christmas tree, and so that's always nice. And of course, yeah, you have the Christmas Eve dinner, and then of course you'd have the Christmas Day dinner. But in the um, in the United States and I think in the UK as well, the presents stuff is done on the morning of Christmas Day, which doesn't seem right to me. I think Christmas presents on Christmas Eve always seems much better. Um, anyway, going back to Matt Gates, and I can't say I read the entirety of that ethics committee report because it's very salacious. So, I'm not that interested in all the salacious details about his life. Um, it's strange. I still don't quite have an answer to the question as to why um, Trump nominated Gates to begin with. He had to have known that there would be serious problems trying to get Gates confirmed. I mean, not only was he not a particularly liked person, but there were obviously various skeletons in his cupboard. And while it's true, to give him the benefit of the doubt, I mean that the Justice Department, which is certainly was not friendly towards Gates, this was the Biden Justice Department, so they. Hold on, I got it. Darren Levy says, "My Estonian family in Estonia having their family meal and presents today on Sarita. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, that's the way it has to be. Um, and yeah, no, I think that's entirely right. And the Christmas Eve dinner, and I mean, you know, they had sort of a fish. You always had some fishy meal, and so and then you have on the Christmas day you would have some the meat dish. I mean, I've never been a huge fan of fish, but you know, it was always kind of nice on Christmas Eve. But anyway, going back to Gates, he I mean, he obviously behaved with amazing recklessness. You know, the fact that he was young and foolish and so on. You know, that's obviously that's a perfectly reasonable excuse. And you know, yeah, I mean, people are young and people are foolish when they're young and they do a lot of foolish things. I mean, that's a given. Um, However, for somebody who clearly aspired to a political career, he did behave with amazing recklessness. And again, he wasn't wholly a kind of, I don't know, a neophyte or fish out of water or whatever when it came to a public life. I mean, his father was a very wealthy man involved prominently in Floridian politics, so he had to learn from an early age that any reckless behavior that you engage in, however young you are, is going to come back to haunt you, and it's going to come back and hit you very hard. And particularly if you're quite a controversial figure, you're a figure on the right. Um, Gates has taken very contentious positions on issues, so therefore he was always going to be rather vulnerable to such attacks. So it would seem strange for somebody like that to attend parties with a very shady character, this Greenberg, who's now in prison. Um, Essentially, drug fueled orgies that he attended, and again, you think what was going on in his mind that he didn't think that this was going to come back and hurt him. Um, And so while he says, well, I didn't do anything that was criminal, as evidenced by the DOJ's, long, longer than a year's investigation of Gates, um, the ethics committee report isn't quite so unequivocal because he does say that he had sexual relations with an underage girl, a 17-year-old girl. Now, this is entirely a kind of a technicality, really, when it comes to Florida. I mean, to call a 17-year-old girl underage and that somehow he had broken the law because he had, so, I mean, it was only because in Florida the age of consent is 18. I mean, it's much lower in many parts of the United States, much lower than I mean, it's much higher in many parts of the United States than it's in other words, the age of consent is much lower in many parts of the United States than it is in Florida. But in much of Europe, the age of consent is 14, which I think is probably too young, but nonetheless, 14 is the age of consent. I mean, even in conservative Hungary, the age of consent is 14. So the whole thing about well, she was 17 and so this is statutory rape is really just, I mean, it's just is a technicality because that's the law is in Florida. But in any case, be that as it may, that still would make him liable to having broken the law in was it Darren says it's in the UK it's 16. So yeah, in the UK it's 16. So that even that is higher than it is in much of Europe. I mean, as I say, conservative Hungary, it's 14. Um, and so really, I mean, when people refer to them as somebody the 17, oh, he raped a child and she was 17. I mean, it's kind of silly. But nonetheless, the law is what it is, and so he would be liable to criminal prosecution. However, um, that would be a state crime. I mean, that wouldn't be a federal crime. I mean, it would be a state crime in the state of Florida. So the DOJ couldn't really go after him um, for supposedly committing a state crime. I mean, the state of Florida could, in theory, go after him, but the statute of limitations has expired on that. I mean, because this supposedly happened, I think, in 2017. So that's it's too late to go after him now. Um, and yeah, and then the other things about how he was giving this money to these young women. I mean, it's he said, "Well, I was a generous sort of person." That's Gates say. I was generous. I always gave money to these young women. This is highly unbelievable. I mean, if he's giving money, I mean, let's say he's a generous person, then he could give them presents and say, oh, I really don't, I gave them presents, whatever, I bought them perfume or flowers or dresses or I don't know, whatever. But sending money, that sounds like he's engaging in prostitution. I mean, that's why he'd be sending money. Again, not only is it a foolish thing to do, I mean, if you're going to give money for sexual favors, you got to make sure that you do it in cash. You don't want to do it with wiring money because there's always a trace of wires, and certainly don't want to do it via checks. Again, checks can easily be traced, wires can easily be traced. So it's a really, amazingly foolish thing to do. I mean, it's how they got Elliot Spitzer, the New York governor, the former New York Attorney General, and then New York governor, because he was wiring money. He was, wiring money to escort agencies and or prostitutes. So that was again a very foolish on Gates's part. I mean, the Justice Department couldn't really go after. I mean, the whole thing about interstate commerce and that somehow he was again paying prostitutes across state lines, and somehow that's a federal matter. I mean, the DOJ wouldn't go after somebody for that. I mean, because if it's consensual, and obviously it is consensual, in the case of this any kind of sex for money transaction, it's consensual. The DOJ wouldn't go after him. So I mean, he didn't exactly get a bill of health from the DOJ. But either way, I mean, it is quite damaging, this report. Now, again, I can't answer the question why Trump nominated him, because Trump is he's very shrewd politically, and he had to have known that Gates would not get through the nomination process. As I said earlier, he wasn't liked, and there was this ethics committee investigation, and now these things, they didn't do Trump any damage at all. Just like the when the Bush the elder had nominated John Tower. Um, as his defense secretary, and then all this, all the stuff about Tao's drinking and cavorting with women of loose morals came out, and so Tao basically was defeated in the vote in the Senate. It didn't really do Bush any harm. I mean, it was quickly forgotten. I mean, no one remembers John Tower at all now. I mean, I'm sure you as John, who's John Tower? No one remembers. And um, George H.W. Bush, he was a one-term president. He lost out, which is quite unusual. One-term presidents. But he did lose out after just one term to Bill Clinton, but it had nothing to do with the failure of the town nomination. So the whole Matt Gaetz saga hasn't damaged Trump at all. And again, since Trump doesn't need to seek re-election, then the whole thing is moot. Now, as for Gates, you know, normally you say, well, after a report like that, your career is finished, and I think that would probably have been true in olden days. This is so damaging that you just have to slink off and hope that everybody has forgotten about you. But that I don't think then that's not the case anymore. The funny thing is that even in let's say 1988, when Gary Hart was really the front runner to win the Democratic Party nomination, and then of course there was the whole thing with the monkey business on that boat where he had that young woman that very rather attractive young woman, Donna Rice, I think her name was, sitting on his lap and having a good time. That was enough to sink him. Now, admittedly, he foolishly had lied about this and had asserted to the media that, oh no, I don't do things like this. I'm a happily married man and whatever. So I mean, it was a stupid thing to do because the reporters, they knew perfectly well about his extracurricular activities. So when he said to them, "Oh, I don't do anything like that," why don't you just follow me around? You'll find it's really very boring. And so they said, "Okay, fine, we'll follow you around, and then when we catch you with one of these attractive young women, we're going to publish it." I mean, this kind of stuff, it's so easy for journalists to do. I mean, they do a bad job about almost anything else, but when it comes to sex and anything salacious, they do actually a very good job. It's a nice, easy thing. It's nothing complicated about it. You follow your man, and sure enough, you're going to catch him in flagranto. And so, that's a that's an easy one. So Gary Hart was very foolish in issuing this challenge, but um, but Bill Clinton was the one who essentially uh, brought to an end the whole kind of uh, lubricious attitude, which used to bring to an end those political careers when you're caught with a fancy woman. I mean, it was because Bill Clinton, they did catch him and then some with any number of women, and it didn't damage him. So, but that was 1992. But you remember, I mean, in Citizen Kane, when Charles Foster Kane is caught in this nest of immorality with the singer. That was the end of his run for governor. He went down to a humiliating defeat, and I think that was true back then. And as I say, it was true even up until 1992 that if you had a something scandalous, immoral in your personal life, then well, scandalous, immoral. Basically, you're seeing women other than the woman that you're married to. That was enough to be scandalous and immoral. And but Bill Clinton, he got through that, and once he did it, then essentially all kinds of things like that, they lost their toxic quality, and that's why all this stuff about Gates, and clearly there really isn't any basis for criminal prosecution. So I would think that in a couple of years' time, Gates will make a comeback. Um, and so he will. Yeah, he will. I think that will. I won't have to worry too much about his fate. I mean, and all this will be forgotten. I mean, this is the kind of this is we talk about it now, and then boom, in a few months' time, no one will be able to remember any of this. Um, so that's the that's that. Now somebody says here, Gary Hire. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Gary Hire says, talk about latest in Georgia and Moldova. Well, that's very interesting because we in Georgia we had that election, and as you know, the Georgian Dream Party, which was used to be much in favor in the West because it was seen to be pro-Western. But the Georgian, but has fallen out of favor, um, in many ways because the Georgian Dream Party has seen that the Western plan for Georgia was very similar to the Western plan for Ukraine, which was to use Georgia as a battering ram against Russia, to use Georgia as the place where the West can open up a second front against Russia. And since Georgia is a small country, and Georgia relies very heavily on Russia for trade, for commerce, for energy, Georgia didn't want to go down this path. And so the Georgian dream, as I say, which was once looked upon favorably in the West, has gradually distanced itself from the West and adopted legislation indicating that it was going to go down its own path. So first of all, it adopted that legislation that modeled on the America's Foreign Agents Registration Act that Russia also has adopted, and then of course it also adopted legislation restricting LGBTQ advocacy. So no LGBTQ advocacy in schools, no LGBTQ advocacy in the media, and so on. So again, they fell out of favor. And then, of course, the West did what it always does, which is to start bullying and threatening and telling Georgians before the recent parliamentary election that you better vote against the Georgian Dream Party, or else we're going to make life very, very unpleasant for you. But the Georgians nonetheless went ahead, voted for the Georgian Dream Party, and they won pretty comfortably, 54% or so. And of course, then the West did its usual thing, imposed sanctions against Georgia. Remember, Georgia, as things stand, is still on track, or has been promised NATO membership. It was, like Ukraine, it was promised NATO membership in Bucharest in April 2008, and then of course the EU promised. I think it was 2022. It promised Georgia and a speeded up process of EU accession. Of course, that's all hooey. I mean, everybody knows that isn't going to happen. But nonetheless, we're going to go through negotiations and so on. It was done, of course, with a view to keeping Georgia on track in the West camp and to be reliably anti-Russian. Um, However, the Georgian Dream really wasn't interested in going along with that scheme, and sort of moved away from that. But that's the way the Georgian wanted it. So it did 54% in that parliamentary election, which is that's a comfortable victory. And then, of course, the West activated their deep seat agent, which is the president Salome Zorabichvili, who is a French woman. She was born in France and lived all her life in France. She was a career diplomat in the French foreign ministry, and she had been appointed to as France's ambassador to Georgia because she had Georgian roots. And then the West came up with this wizard idea: why don't we make Salome Zorabichvili president of Georgia? So, she had been, a French diplomat. She had been France's ambassador to Georgia. Well, why don't we just make her Georgia's president? So what they did was to, she had to take out a citizenship, a Georgian citizen. She wasn't even a Georgian citizen, and lo and behold, she got to be the president of Georgia. But of course, her real masters were really not the Georgian people, but France, NATO, and so on. But anyway, then they kind of the Georgian Dream changed the system in Georgia, where before the president, although it was always a ceremonial position, but it had real powers. Saakashvili was president, and he did have powers. But anyway, they decided to remove the powers from the president, so that the president of Georgia would be ceremonial, as presidents in many European countries are. Like the president of Hungary is a ceremonial position, president of Croatia, and so on. These are real power is with the government. So anyway, they reduced the powers of the presidency, and also changed the constitution, whereby a president would not be elected directly by voters, but would be essentially voted on within parliament. It would be like an electoral college system. And of course, there were term limits. So with Zurabichvili, she was fervently opposed to Georgian Dream, and her term of office was coming to an end. But she can't extend it. There's a term limits, and she came out furiously against Georgian Dream and denounced the election. So that was all fraudulent. It was a stolen election, and Russia stole the election. Russia did this. When she was asked, "Do you have any evidence for this?" she said, "I don't need to provide you with any evidence. It's not up to me. I'm the president. It's not up to me to provide you with evidence. Go to the security agencies." Though she had no evidence, yet she nonetheless went around declaring that Russia had somehow stolen this election. And of course, the media repeated this. Somehow Russia interfered in this election. Again, no one ever provided any evidence for this. And then again, Georgian Dream was invariably described as pro-Russian and pro-Putin. But it was nothing of the sort. I mean, in Georgia, there are no pro-Russian or pro-Putin figures. And again, the same thing happens in Hungary. I mean, when the media invariably describe Viktor Orban as pro-Russia, pro-Putin, Putin's best friend in Europe. Again, there is no one pro-Russian or pro-Putin in Hungary. I mean, it's just that such people don't exist. But anyway, so Zorobichvili then, having declared this election was stolen and that Russia was about to take over in Georgia, and then she traveled. She went on a kind of a trip around Europe, a kind of an ill will trip around Europe, demanding that the EU, the United States, and everyone impose sanctions against Georgia, and that there should be new elections held. Those elections, the one that she had, she had lost, need to be canceled, and that new elections need to be held. Now, in the meantime, the new Georgian government said that, well, we're putting on the back burner negotiations with the EU on accession to the EU, because essentially it's not going to happen any time for the foreseeable future, and the EU is using these negotiations, the fake, phony negotiations, to coerce us, to extort from us concessions. So we're just not going to do this anymore. And then we had the renter mob coming out protesting, and of course this renter mob, very similar to the renter mob that came out to protest in Kiev in the winter of 2013 to 2014, because Yanukovych has said, well, I'm putting on hold the Ukraine-EU association agreement. So out they came, and there was Zorobichvili leading the protests. So essentially, you have a president of a country that's supporting violent protesters on the streets, a president of a country demanding the overturning of election results, and the president of a country begging other countries to impose sanctions against the people she purports to represent, the Georgians that she represents. But anyways, but Zorobichvili, whose term in office runs out on December the 30th, which means it's on Monday, next Monday, it runs out, and already the parliament has voted in her successor, who is a former football player, quite a successful football player. He played in a number of Europe's top clubs, including Manchester City. So therefore, he had to have been a very good player to get to play for such clubs. But anyway, he's set to take over on December the 30th, and she said she is not leaving. She's not going anywhere. She's going to stay in the presidential palace. And again, she gets the Western media, extol her. What a fantastic woman! This is great. The same media that screamed, yelled that somehow Trump isn't accepting the election results of 2020. But in this case, I think, fantastic! She's not leaving the presidential palace. So again, no evidence has been presented that there was anything untoward about those elections, or anything that was could have swung the election the other way. The Georgian Dream won comfortably. They got 54% of the vote, so it wasn't even close. So even if you're going to come up with some evidence of, here there was a case of ballot stuffing, or somebody was unable to vote or whatever, that's still 54%. You're going to come up with a lot of votes that that would have swung the election the other way. So that's where it is. I mean, Zorobichvili is saying she's not going to leave the presidential palace. and uh, and then it's a really kind of an interesting question, because then the other day, uh, Zurabichvili said that she is going to order new elections. Now, I'm not at all sure a president, according to Georgia's constitution, is going to order a new election, but she says she's going to go order this new elections. Um, Now, so the Georgian prime minister was the Georgian Dream character, said, well, if you do that, if you try to order new elections, then you're basically engaging in insurrection, and not only are you going to be removed physically from the presidential palace, you will be put in prison. So he pretty much told her that if you do this, if you try to order new elections, you'll go to prison, and well, the people around her will also be in prison. So he says, look, the Georgian prime minister, no one wants to put a 72-year-old woman in prison, but you may just leave us with no choice. It's, I mean, Zora Bichvili is obviously, she's failing her masters, as she's getting more and more desperate, because she hasn't delivered. I mean, what she was required to do, the reason why they essentially parachuted her in as Georgia's president, the French woman was parachuted in to be Georgia's president, was in order to keep Georgia in the NATO EU camp, even though Georgia's not a member of NATO or the EU. But basically, you want to be in the Western camp, which is what it was back in the days of Shevardnadze. He's the hapless foreign minister under Gorbachev, who then, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, went off to become president of Georgia. And then Shevardnadze himself was overthrown. He wasn't delivering fast enough for the West, so he was overthrown by Saakashvili. This was the Rose Revolution. It was, I think, 2004. I think, yeah. And then, so that was Saakashvili, and of course Saakashvili led Georgia to that catastrophic war with South Ossetia, egged on obviously by the Americans, because he evidently thought the Americans were going to be with him. They'd supported him during the coup against Shevardnadze, and so naturally he thought that the Americans would support him over South Ossetia. But of course, the Americans didn't. They did what they always do: encourage a leader like that, create a crisis, but they're not going to come in and start risking their own lives to fight Russia over Georgia. So that was it. But still, the Americans had hope that they would maintain Georgia. I mean, this is a long-term project in the not just the dismantlement of the Soviet Union, but the scooping up of all of the republics of the Soviet Union within the sort of the NATO Western transatlantic orbit. That was the plan. So they succeeded which was an easy one, the three Baltic states, which were three individual republics of the Soviet Union. They succeeded more or less in Moldova, also a republic of the Soviet Union, but Moldova is not a member of of NATO. Moldova's constitution still says that Moldova will be neutral, but that could change. But Moldova is on this fast track negotiation to join the EU. But the big enchilada was obviously Ukraine. That was that project that the United States and the West embarked on, really starting in 1991, to get Ukraine into the Western transatlantic systems, because Russia without Ukraine is really much diminished, and not just diminished, but Russia ceases to be a great power. And this was stated explicitly by Brzezinski, who said that, hey, if you want to make sure that Russia is never again a great power, then you take Ukraine. You got to grab Ukraine. If, however, Russia maintains Ukraine, Russia and Ukraine are together, then Russia will be a great power. But if you want to prevent Russia from being a great power, you have to cultivate Ukraine, and it's spelled it out in that a very good book. I mean, it's a very well crafted book about the grand chessboard by Brzezinski. So that was the project, and they methodically moved on Ukraine, and of course they did the same with Georgia, and of course, NATO was never going to stop there. Once they can get Ukraine, kind of Georgia, you got Moldova, you got the as I say, you got the three Baltic states, and at the same time, you've got the stans, you've got Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and of course you have Tajikistan. All of them, there's always the plan to scoop them all up within NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So in other words, but Georgia was a key part of this, which means the first step of the NATO expansion was to scoop up every single member of the Warsaw Pact. In other words, the Soviet Union's allies scoop every single one of them up within NATO, and then to go beyond that, because Yugoslavia was not a member of NATO. Yugoslavia was not a member of the Warsaw Pact, but even so, they scooped up every single republic of Yugoslavia, with the exception of Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina. And in both cases, it's the obdurate Serbs that were thwarting the NATO plan. But Georgia is, however small it is, it's a strategic location. It's there, east coast of the Black Sea, rich agricultural land, and it's just so it's mouth-watering for NATO. They're not going to just let that one go. So the success of the Georgian Dream Party it causes rage within the halls of NATO. I mean, that's why there's never a moment that passes that they don't denounce Georgian Dream. How dare they thwart our plans? And so that's why we have to see what's going to happen, whether how far Zurabichvili is going to take it. Now, my own feeling is that she's 72 years old, and it's easy to talk. I'm ready to go to prison. I'm ready to die for my beliefs. Give me liberty or give me death, or whatever. Well, we'll just see how somebody who has lived in the lap of luxury all her life, how she will fare in an icy dungeon in Georgia, whether she, how quickly she would break. So we'll see. But as we've had cause to observe, Georgia has done rather well. I mean, Georgia has stood up to this extraordinary bullying, and is still holding strong. They stood up to the pressure they came under when they adopted that Foreign Agents Registration Act. There was a lot of pressure exerted against Georgia, and they stood up on the LGBTQ law again. There were orders came down from Brussels and Washington. Don't you dare adopt this law! And now they're holding firm in refusing to cancel these elections. So we'll see what happens on Monday, whether Zorabichvili is going to hang on, and will they have to drag her out in her nightie and allow the new president to take over. Anyway, let's go to our friends on our locals page, and these are gagglers who do work a year and a day to make sure that the dogs are kept in clover. It's very which because they're the people who matter. Again, I encourage everybody who's tuning in on YouTube's or anywhere else. I encourage everybody to subscribe to us on locals. Just even if you don't want to pay a membership fee, just please subscribe. We have so many things going. We have a Gaggle book club, we have a Gaggle film club, we have a Gaggle music club. So there's a lot of things, and there's a community, and the Gagglers are constantly posting new and fascinating pieces of information, from all sorts of news sites all over the world. So it's you have to I have to go to the Gaggles locals page several times a day because there's so many things that are posted that I need to, in order to keep up with everything is going on, all sorts of things that I'd missed, and it's really fascinating. So please subscribe, at thegaggle.locals.com. Anyway, Stone River, thank you so much. That's very, very generous of you. I really, really appreciate that. Thank you so very much, Stone River, for your generosity. It says, destined for greatness. Merry Christmas to George and Peter and Gagglers. Thank you so much. That's very generous, and a very nice looking picture. Potatoes and onions. That's very, very nice. So thank you so much. Dale Owen, thank you. Merry Christmas. Nadoli Klaven to everyone. Yes, thank you. Dale, I don't know whether you saw we posted on the Gaggle book club last week George Dangerfield's book, The Strange Death of Liberal England, which is a really interesting book, written a long time ago. It was written in the 1930s, and it was really about the last days of Edwardian England just before World War One. It's a beautifully written book, and it's a really fun read. Um, so Dale, I mean, if you haven't seen it, haven't read it, then please do. And I'd love to know your thoughts about Dangerfield's book. Yeah, that's all. Anyway, but thank you, Dale. Cynthia, always thank you so much, Cynthia. Well, thank you for your generosity, and that brings us on. That again, we have the Gaggle Film Club. Our screening, which we held yesterday, and we had the classic, one of the really all-time greats, which is the Battle of Algiers, and so it's on the locals board. Everyone can go watch the Battle of Algiers, and most important, read Cynthia's accompanying notes and observations and thoughts and background information. So it's an essential reading to get the most out of the screening. So do watch it, and above all, do read Cynthia's really interesting observations and thoughts. Now it's a very good film. It's a better film than I had remembered, because it's actually quite even-handed. I mean, obviously, Pontichorvo, the, uh, the writer and the director, his sympathies are with the FLN, the Algerian independence movement, but nonetheless, he certainly presents them as essentially engaged in terrorism. His doesn't present them as noble, selfless heroes. I mean, they're engaged in terrorism. He's unambiguous that they killed civilians. They bombed civilian targets. And of course, the French did the same. They also hit civilians and placed bombs and carried out assassinations and kidnapped and tortured. And so it was very nasty all around. And the war was very nasty. But what was interesting, of course, and this again comes out in the film, was that the French had won that war, and if you watch the film, really, pretty much up until the last 10 minutes, it's leading up to the conclusion: the French are winning this war, and it's very reminiscent, essentially, to the way Israel conducts its wars. I mean, they just did it through torture. They did it through assassinations, and it was really a savage war that the French waged. And in the end, it was successful. In the end, they had defeated the FLN. They had they killed all their leaders. Whoever hadn't been killed, had been arrested, put in prison, as broken men. In the end, I mean, the Algeria became independent not because of the FLN. It became independent because de Gaulle decided that this really wasn't worth it, and that there's just no way in the world that France could hold on to Algeria. There's no way in the world that Algeria could be integrated into France, because essentially the French weren't going to accept millions of Muslims as French citizens. And so it was a kind of a pie in the sky idea that somehow France could hold on to Algeria. So France, essentially moved in the same direction as all of the European states moved after World War II, which was to dissolve their former empires. Even though France had believed that somehow, well, the case of Algeria was separate because it wasn't a colonial possession; it was really a part of France. But de Gaulle rightly said, no, it's not a part of France. It's never going to become a part of France, and let it go. But in terms of the war, the actual fighting between the independence-seeking FLN and the French military won. They had crushed the FLN. That it's very interesting. I mean, how when one looks at history, one was saying, oh, these that somehow these rebels had defeated the imperial power, but that really wasn't true. It's the same with the British and Irish nationalism. I mean, particularly after World War One, when there was a really very, very difficult fight that the British had to wage against the IRA. So this was, from after 1918, and then they brought in, the Black and Tans. They were very nasty. These were ex-servicemen, and they really carried out the most savage war against the Irish, and they eventually they crushed the IRA. But then the British decided that, what the hell, Ireland's never going to be a part of Britain, and so the British settled essentially for creating the Irish Free State, and then of course eventually this became an independent Ireland. But Ireland had to make the concession, which was they had to essentially let go of Ulster, the north eastern part of the Ireland. They had to just let that go. But the rest of Ireland got independence, even though again the British, through a savage war, had crushed the IRA. But again, much like the French in Algeria, the black and tans were kind of notorious for the brutality and cruelty of the way they fought. Anyway, so Cynthia says, "Merry Crisis and Happy New Fear for all of us, but for the very select chosen few, I hope they'll get even more of that, loads more of it, in fact." Yeah, that's very good. On a more serious note, I wish everyone here a very Merry Christmas. Absolutely. And very Merry Christmas to you, Cynthia. I mean, you've done so much outstanding work over the past year, so you definitely deserve a Merry Christmas. And many thanks to you, George, for your continued efforts to map the crooked path of current events, including many historic events as well. Thank you so much, Cynthia. So, but anyway, thank you again for all that you do, and you've made the film club a really vital and exciting part of the Gaggle, much more so than it was before. Anyway, Dale Owen says in Germany they exchange gifts on the 24th as well, as do the British royal family. Is that right? I didn't know the British royal family does that. I knew that the Germans did that, but I didn't know that the British royal family also exchange gifts on the 24th. Huh. Yeah. Anyway, Anne Marie, thank you so much. Thank you. Good to see you, Anne Marie. And you may have written. I may have missed it, but I was kind of interested in what you think, Anne Marie, of Elgar's symphony that was posted on the Gaggle Music Club. It may not be your thing. I mean, Elgar is a very English composer. I like it a great deal, having lived many years in England, so it always just makes me nostalgic for England, makes me long for England. It just always reminds me of the best of England, the kind of England, but that I remembered, or the England that I imagine, the England that you read about from great English literature, and so that's what Elgar always means to me. So I always love him, even though I mean he doesn't have the stature of the great European contemporaries who were composing at the time. But nonetheless, I think he's a very good, a great composer. And the first symphony, I think, is a very fine piece of music. But I'd be interested to learn what Anne Marie, what you think of it. Marty, always very good to see you. Thank you for your generosity. It says, "Merry Tuesday, George and Gagglers. Wishing you all a wonderful Christmas." Thank you so much. And Robert, also thank you so much for your generosity. Merry Christmas from New Jersey. Who's Christie has weighed in, pun intended, on Elon Musk, claiming that Trump will soon ditch Musk. Hope he's full of it and just trying to stir up trouble as he's wont to do. Well, that's a very interesting question, because I also hope that he is wrong. But I also have to think that the media are clearly trying to needle Trump. They're needling him by continually referring to Musk as a co-president, or he's the real president, and that Trump is somehow the vice president to President Musk, because they figure that this is going to annoy Trump. I mean, Trump doesn't want to play second fiddle to anyone, even if the man is the richest man in the world. But nonetheless, I mean, I think that it will grate on him, and that even came out in Trump's speech in Phoenix, Arizona, over the weekend, where he kept bringing the subject up. No, he said Elon Musk is not the president. No, he's not co-president. I like Elon, but he's not co-president. So we'll see. I mean, Trump has to be no, number one. I mean, that's how he he's not going to uh, play second fiddle. So, but we'll see whether he's going to get provoked um, by this. I mean, there's no question. The media are going to absolutely play this up, and they're doing it now with this whole the issue that Musk is really the president. Trump is just doing what Musk wants him to do, and so. We'll have to see how that plays out. Anyway, but as for Chris Christie, you have to fill me in. I'm not even yeah, again, pun intended. So Chris could fill me in. What exactly does Chris Christie do now? I mean, is he working at a law firm? I mean, what how, how does he make ends meet? I mean, he may be a pundit somewhere, but there's limited interest in Chris Christie's punditry because Trump has now won. Trump prevailed. Chris Christie was wrong. I mean, he can go on complaining about this or that aspect of Trump, but there are plenty of people already doing that. There's no shortage of Trump haters in the media. So, what's Chris Christie's value added? I mean, he was only interesting for the media because he was clearly threatening to challenge Trump for the Republican Party nomination, which of course he did. But he did very badly, and is obviously he's going to do badly. And maybe Christie has hopes for running again, but it's very unlikely that he'd be able to pull that off. It's very unlikely he would be able to raise any money. I would imagine in 2028 is going to be quite a crowded field. I mean, we can already see, J.D. Vance is obviously going to be in it. Ted Cruz is going to be in it. Marco Rubio is going to be part of it. Josh Hall is going to be in on it. I mean, there's no shortage of candidates for the GOP nomination 2028. I don't see where's the opening for Chris Christie. So I don't know. I'm just curious what Chris Christie is now doing in order to make ends meet. I mean, but maybe he's at some fancy law firm. Anyway, thank you, Jenny. It's very, very good to see you, Jenny. We kind of miss you. It's sad that you're not with us to provide your customary scabrous scatological humor, which was always you know added something to the socioeconomic cultural level of the Gaggle board. So we miss you, Jenny, and I hope you'll be back soon and back on a regular basis. But also, thank you so much for your generosity for your Christmas present. Really, really appreciate that. That's so nice. But yeah, but please, come back and make it a regular thing. Anne Marie, thank you, Gabe. Thank you for your generosity. And then Marty says, George, have you been following the Daniel Dogan U.S. extradition case? I have to say, I have to say that I haven't. Let's see. So there's a link here, but let's see if I can get something interesting out of this. So here's a tweet or an X. It says it's deep. This is from somebody called David Shoebridge. He says it's deeply distressing. The Attorney General has approved extraditing Dan Dugan to the U.S. He has chosen to send this Australian father of six to a politicized prosecution and done so just before Christmas, hoping everyone has switched off from the news. This is so wrong. So what has Daniel Duggan done or alleged to have done? Extradition: Daniel Duggan to be extradited from Australia to U.S. over alleged training of Chinese fighter pilots. It says family devastated. Okay. As Attorney General confirms, Australian pilot will be surrendered to face potential 60-year prison term if convicted. And then we have Tony Kevin. Oh, I know Tony Kevin. He says here, this cowardly decision and brave Duggan family won't be forgotten. I feel utter contempt for Attorney General Dreyfus and his pusillanimous leader, the Prime Minister Albany. Voters will remember, vote anyone but Labour or Coalition, put their parties last always. And then we have another one tweet here. Can you imagine how Dan and Safrin's six children are feeling right now? How little respect any of them will ever have for the Australian government and the rule of law. And this is so very own. Well, this all seems just on the face. Again, I haven't followed the story, but I'm going to obviously read up about it. Is kind of outrageous. I mean, why can't he train Chinese pilots? I mean, that's I think I mean, when you think of what the United States, what NATO do, on what they've been doing in Ukraine, and again, I mean, he obviously, just from the little that I've read, I mean, he's a private contractor. Well, you're a private contractor, then you work on contract for whomever whoever comes along and pays you. Now, evidently the suggestion is you can't do this for China. Again, these military contractors, I mean, the Americans, all retired servicemen do this kind of contractual work. I mean, that's how you make a nice chunk of change after you've retired from service. You work as a contractor, and you lend your skills and whatever, and you training and the kind of thing. So that's what he is doing. He's providing training for Chinese pilots. Now, what is wrong with providing training for Chinese pilots? Is the United States at war with China? I don't think so. And so therefore, what is wrong with doing what Duggan was doing? And so if the United States were at war with China, even if it was an undeclared war, then maybe at least you could see the argument. But in this case, I don't see the argument. I don't see that he's done anything wrong. Now, let's keep in mind what the United States itself has been doing. It's been providing training, weaponry to Ukraine for the purpose of killing Russians. It's also provided targeting information to Ukraine, and in fact, it has selected targets inside Russia on behalf of Ukraine, and it's used its satellite technology to guide and map out the flight paths of Ukrainian missiles that the Americans have provided Ukraine, and of course Ukrainian drones also provided by the United States. But of course Ukraine has its own drones. But every single time Ukraine launches a drone attack on some oil refinery in Russia, Ukraine couldn't do that without the guidance provided by American satellite systems. Now, in this case, um, with Duggan, is that he is just simply providing training to pilots who are not attacking Americans, and they're not in the business of attacking American bases, killing Americans, or anything else. So therefore, that's out of the window. So therefore, you've no basis at all for complaining on that score. But the other issue is that America overlooks the outrageous practice of American citizens wearing the uniform of another country, which again is something Duggan has not done. In fact, from again, Martin, you'd have to clue me in. He is he's an Australian citizen, so I think he's not even an American citizen. I mean, that wasn't clear from what I read, but I'm assuming he's he's an American. He's an Australian. So it gets even more outrageous, therefore, that that this extradition has taken place. I mean, he's an Australian who's being transferred to the United States for the crime of what? I mean, he's not killing any Americans. He's not helping anyone to kill Americans. He's not training anyone to kill Americans. Um, and so where's the crime? But the point is that in the United States, Americans can go and serve in the armed forces of Israel. Now, this is very, very, very strange because it's kind of prohibited in every country that I know of for citizens of that country to serve in the armed forces of another country. You simply cannot do that. And yet, America has consistently turned a blind eye to this. And indeed, we know from these hostages that were seized in Israel by Hamas, many of them were, say, oh, they're Americans, Americans. Well, they were Americans because they were wearing the uniform of the Israeli army. They were serving in the Israeli military. And again, that's far more outrageous than anything Duggan did. So, I mean, thank you, Marty, for bringing this to our attention. This does seem, quite a shocking case. So yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for that. But I mean, like, just go back on the Israel thing. I mean, you got someone like David Brooks, who is the who writes a biweekly column in the New York Times, pontificating about American political culture and Wither America and so on. He has a son who serves in the Israeli armed forces. So here he is. You're pontificating about America, and your son, he's not serving in the American armed forces. He's serving in Israel's armed forces. And this is all of this is well known, and then it's never really brought up against him. And it's like, well, what kind of an American are you if your son is wearing the uniform of another country? Anyways, thank you, Marty. And then Cynthia goes on. In all honesty, George, I find it extremely hard to get into the Christmas spirit. I understand. or to be the least bit thankful when people are celebrating bloody mayhem as a Christmas gift. Yeah, true. Santa dropping bunker bombs or stocking stuffed with body parts are images I would rather avoid. Yeah, it's true. And then Cynthia goes on. Still, it would bring me a great joy. Where are we? Did I lose that? Yeah. Okay, let me go back. Yeah. Um, Still, it would bring me great joy to know that every neocon and neoliberal con had visits from the ghosts of Christmas and will now reform themselves. But alas, the great fiction remains just that, fiction. And most currently, that applies to Giuliani and his merry band of head choppers. Even if we get lucky and that turn out to be a total nonfiction, what sort of message does that send to those who aspire to become top head chopper, reach to the top of the Western hegemony, will crown you king of Islam? All of that is absolutely right, and it's really very depressing because ever since the 2016, 2016, when um, the Syrian army, with the assistance of the Russians, um, took over Aleppo, had removed the jihadis from Aleppo. And then from that moment on, the Christmas 2016, all the way through 2017, 18, 19, and so on, we would have images from Aleppo of the Christians of Aleppo celebrating Christmas. And it would always, one would have, it would warm one's heart to see pictures of these small children wearing their Santa suits. And you say, here we are, this is the image, December 24th, or either that or maybe, or, I think it was December 24th, the Catholic Christmas, or maybe it was Orthodox Christmas. You would see these small children wearing these little Santa suits, and you'd feel really happy with the world. One of the few times one actually smiles with a certain amount of pleasure and delight with the world. Hey, we got rid of the head choppers, we got rid of these Islamists, and now we can have small children singing carols and exchanging presents and wearing these their little Santa suits. And you think, thank God, thank you, President Putin, for having freed at least some Syrians from the tyranny of the head choppers. And one would also know, and would have to note every time we saw this picture of these little children, that, hey, you know who was going to take away your Santa suits? You know who was going to take away your Christmas trees? It was the West, the Christian West, the Western civilization. They were in bed with the head choppers. They were financing the head choppers, arming the head choppers, and they were the ones who were preventing these small children from taking a delight in Christmas. And they, the British and the Americans, in 2017 and 2018 bombed not the Islamists, not ISIS. No, they bombed the Bashar al-Assad and the installations of the Syrian government. That very same government that ensured the freedom of Christians to worship in Syria, because without that, the Islamists would simply chop their heads off, or just simply drive them out. And of course, that's what happened in Idlib and in all those parts of Syria that had been under the control of the Al Qaeda, ISIS, Jabhat al Nusra, HTS, whatever. It's the same bunch. So, going back to that, then that's why this was always the kind of the the annual pleasure one would take of Christmas, thinking, hey, it was Russia that had come in and saved the Christians, and it was the West that was quite happy to see the oldest Christian communities in the world, to see the oldest Christian communities of the world extinguished, just wiped out altogether. And it was rather heartwarming. Well, Russia didn't do much this time around. Didn't do anything. Um, why that was the case, that I guess we've yet to find out. But Russia didn't do anything to protect the Christians, and you'd have to think that the last of these ancient Christian communities are, is going to disappear. I don't see any future anywhere there. And there's not even much future for these Christians in those Palestinian territories that are under the overall control of Israel. Israel is in fact extremely intolerant of the Christians. So the Christians in the West Bank who complain about persecution, they don't protest about the suffering persecution at the hands of the Palestinians, because many Palestinians are Christians. They're complaining about the persecution they're suffering at the hands of Israel and their own very highly intolerant Zionist Judaism. But going back to your point, Cynthia, about the neocons, no, none of these neocons has paid any kind of a price. Every time I see David Frum, this evil character, this evil poisonous character who actually looks evil and poisonous, and he's there. He is on CNN, there, kind of there, ubiquitous analyst, and you think, well, this is the person who gave us all these wars, who's been a truly malevolent force for many, many years. And he's done very well for himself. David Brooks, who was a big, big, big champion of the 2003 invasion of Iraq, big champion, and there he is, with his columns in the New York Times. There he is with his son serving. Oh, I think maybe he's now left the Israeli army, but for years he served in the Israeli army. And there he is pontificating about America, pontificating about the evil of Trump, and he hasn't paid any price for having advocated that terrible war. So, yeah, there's nothing. There's nothing good. As I say, from up until now, up until this Christmas, we could at least take pleasure in those Christians having been liberated in Syria, and think, hey, look at those little children in their Santa suits. Thank President Putin for having delivered a Christmas for them. Well, no Christmas this time. There's no one's going to be celebrating Christmas in Damascus or in Aleppo this year. So anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia, for everything, and thank you for your generosity. And so Meg says, apropos of Christie, because I was asking about Christie. Christie is mentioned in the recent University of Delaware alumni magazine. He is a Delaware grad, as am I. I didn't know that. He was awarded a medal there for some inexplicable reason, perhaps because U.S. universities are tone deaf. This bloated, egocentric loser, my opinion, recently responded to a remark by a woman who intimated that Ukraine was none of our business by stating, that's the price you pay for being the richest, strongest country in the world. Well, that's a remarkably stupid thing, Christie, to say. But it's pretty much what I would expect. And of course, when he was running for um, for the Republican nomination, I guess last year and early this year, these were the kinds of things he was saying. He was attacking Trump, and and anyone who thinks like Trump, how dare you not being on board for Ukraine. And of course, he's one even back in I think 2016 when he wanted to punch Putin in the nose. He was a big one for punching Putin in the nose. So he's very much into all of that. We've got to punch the Russians. So yeah, I mean, no question. I mean that's the Chris Christie brand. And so if he does um, choose to run in 2028, I mean, he's going to be, running on that. Hey, neo conservatism still has a future. I Christie was always a dreadful person. He had this brief flurry in in 2012, simply because there were no good alternatives then. Um, Mitt Romney was just such a terrible, horrific candidate that the people started desperately looking around for, well, maybe somebody else could do the job. And unfortunately, there were GOP influencers who seized on the Chris Christie figure and said, "Oh yeah, it has to be him. He's the ideal candidate." So it was actually Ann Coulter who kind of created this myth of Chris Christie. That he's the one that the Republicans need to go for. Um, and I even then I couldn't see what was appealing about him other than he wasn't Romney. He lacked Romney's smoothness. He lacked Romney's kind of waspy good looks, and his general um, Romney's kind of affable um, demeanor. You know, Christie was just the opposite of that: bloated, overweight, and very, very unpleasant. So it's like, well, hey, we can't go with Romney. Let's see if we can find the anti-Romney, because otherwise, I don't get why Chris Christie was ever spoken of um, as a kind of a GOP um, nominee. Now I understand. Oh, New Jersey, it's a blue state, and but first of all, even if he were more popular than he was, and he wasn't terribly popular, um, but even if he were, he wasn't going to carry New Jersey. It doesn't matter. You can be a governor of a state, of a blue state. You can be a Republican, a governor of a blue state. It doesn't translate into your being able to carry that state in the general election. I mean, it was a George Pataki, the hapless George Pataki. I think he was also seeking the nomination in 2016. And again, it was ludicrous that the people were, advocating on Pataki's behalf. Oh, Pataki, great! He's New York, New York. He's not going to carry New York. It's just an absurdity. And this is always this fantasy. Pete Wilson was another one. Oh, so many people were saying that when I was out in California, and these various Republicans out there. Oh yeah, Pete Wilson, fantastic. He's California. He's going to carry California. Pete Wilson was not going to carry California in any presidential election. So Christie was not, there was never anything to him other than the unpleasantness. I mean, he's just so unattractive, either physically and in every other way, that you think, hey, it's like, well, that's maybe it's like people sort of get acquiring a kind of a certain following because they're so ugly, they're so unattractive. Well, if he's so unattractive, there must be something deeply good about him deep inside. So that's the the only reason he was ever spoken of as a potential nominee. Now, to be fair, Republicans have often uh, selected as their nominee somebody who was patently absurd, as any kind of a candidate for the presidency. Somebody who's so unlikable, so unattractive, so ridiculous in the positions that he has taken, that you kind of wonder what the hell the Republicans thinking in nominating this person. Like I remember Bob Dole. I mean, who the hell would ever think that Bob Dole would ever gonna win a general election? I mean, it was an absurdity. And then, of course, then you had John McCain. I mean, John McCain was nuts, and everybody knew he was nuts. Everybody knew that with John McCain as president, World War III is going to break out within about a month. And then you had the Richie Rich smoothie Mitt Romney. So if you go down that path of getting people who are so utterly unsuitable as your nominee, I mean, why not? Hey, Chris Christie would say, "Well, I'm really ugly. I'm really unattractive. I'm a bully. I'm disgustingly fat. Well, hey, why not me?" So, so there is an argument there. Anyway, Anne Marie, she says, "I love Elgar a lot." Like that, I'm glad. Anyway, I'm looking forward to reading your comments on Elgar. Carlos, Merry Christmas to all Gagglers and to George. Thank you so much, Carlos. Really appreciate that. And then Stone River says, "Nice to see Jenny pop her head above the parapet." Yeah, it is indeed very, very nice. Anyway, so good to see you. And then Robert says, Trump posted this meme showing what Christie is doing with himself, and that explains the never-ending stream of drones seen playing. I've seen that one about he's he's eating these burgers, and these drones are coming by. Now, either I couldn't get understand from that image or that meme that whether the drones were delivering um, burgers or they were taking Christie's burgers away from him. So I couldn't quite figure out. Either way, it was just hilarious. Christie was um, sitting there munching on his burgers, and then all these completely oblivious to all these drones with burger bags hanging from them. Um, and then Robert says, and speaking of Duggan and fighter jets, do you think that it was more likely the Houthis rather than friendly fire that brought down the F-18 on the Red Sea? Well, that's a very good question. And I don't know the answer to that, but I absolutely thought that at the time that that they wanted to say that it was a friendly fire. I'm not sure um, whether that's a better thing to say or was friendly fire, which looks kind of as if you incompetent. Um, but the problem, I think, by saying it was the Houthis who brought it down, because then you have to really launch a big attack on the Houthis, and I don't see any reason why the outgoing Biden administration wouldn't do that. Um, that makes me think that it probably was friendly fire, because in normal times you might think, okay, the Americans, for whatever reason, they don't want to attack the Houthis, or just launch an attack on Iraq or whatever. But in this case, why not? Hey, the Houthis took down our aircraft. Let's hit the Houthis. What's to stop them? So I don't know what would be the incentive in this case to lie, since bomb the Houthis, and why not? Israel would certainly want the Americans to bomb the Houthis. So I wouldn't see any reason why not say, yeah, it was the Houthis who did this. Um, anyway, Anne Marie says some interesting news from. Oh, there we are. Let me see. Some interesting news from Switzerland. Um, yeah, I was having difficulties with this. All right, let me click on this tweet on this interesting news from Switzerland. It says a critically important catch. This is Branko Marketic. He's the guy who I think is he writes for he writes for the Jacobin magazine. Yeah, he's good writer. He's always interesting. Anyway, Branko Marketic says a critically important catch from Renaud Bertrand, the former Swiss envoy to Turkey, who was present at the Ukraine-Russian negotiations early in the war, says bluntly that a ceasefire was inches away, weeks into the war, but that the U.S. and the U.K. Pulled the rug. I guess that's he gives this interview. No, I mean I think that there's really no denying of that. I mean, of course, the British continue to deny this. Interestingly, the British media are happy to go along with the stories put out by the British political establishment, chiefly Boris Johnson, and say, no, there's no truth to the story that it was Boris Johnson who basically destroyed that agreement, the Istanbul Agreement, and they've absolutely no evidence to support Johnson's claims, because not only have the Russians repeatedly said it was that the deal was almost there, and that that already been that agreement, the Istanbul Agreement, had been initialed by both sides, the Russians and the Ukrainians. But the Ukrainians themselves have confirmed this. We've covered this on the Gaggle, that the Ukrainians thought this is a bloody good deal, and it was a very good deal, a very bad deal for Russia, but nonetheless, I mean, okay, Ukraine, after this was April 2022, so in other words, less than 2 months after the start of the so-called special military operation, Ukraine was actually in a better position than it had been before the start of the SMO. That's how bad a deal it was for Russia, because at least the up until then, the Crimea issue had been off the table, but now at least the Crimea issue was going to be something settled between in future negotiations between Putin and Zelensky. So Ukraine was actually coming out ahead after the start of the SMO. That's how bad the deal it was for Russia, and that's why the Ukrainian negotiators said, "Hey, this is fantastic," and they said we had the champagne ready. It was there. We were preparing to celebrate the signing of this deal. So with Ukraine having accomplished really this great deal, for having done almost nothing, and they were ready to sign, and then Johnson comes into Kiev and does a very ruthless, a very cynical thing, but at the same time not wholly not wholly incomprehensible thing, because he says, look, we've got the Russians on the run. I mean, in other words, because Russia had made so many concessions, when it didn't really have to, because Russia was so eager to sign this deal in Istanbul, because Russia had made these concessions. The British and the Americans said to themselves, hey, look, we have the Russians on the run. If they're willing to make these concessions now, how many more concessions are they going to make down the road? This is our once in a lifetime opportunity to bring Russia to its knees. It was a cynical, terrible calculation, because just think of the hundreds of thousands of lives that have been lost since then. But that was their calculation, and that was the problem when you make these kinds of concessions. Russia shouldn't have made those concessions. I think that the Istanbul was a terrible deal. Essentially, it was kind of Minsk III. And this is what Johnson did. And Turkey, the Turkish foreign minister, I was forgetting, the Turkish foreign minister said, hey, also, we were close to a deal. And he said, there are people in the West who don't want this war to come to an end. That was Turkey's foreign minister. He didn't say Russia doesn't want this war to come to an end. There are people in the West who don't want this war to come to an end. And there's no question. I mean, this is Johnson. Johnson was working in tandem with the Biden administration, and their view was, we've got the Russians on the run. Let's really press home our advantage. That's how the West is. That's how they operate. That's how they've always operated. And unfortunately, the Russians play into that. Russians should not have agreed to those terms at Istanbul, just like Russia should not have agreed to the terms in Minsk I and II. And I mean, it reminds me a little bit of what happened when Obama in December 2016 expelled Russian diplomats and closed down Russia's diplomatic compounds, imposed sanctions on Russia, alleging Russian interference in the 2016 election. And then when Michael Flynn has that telephone conversation with the Russian ambassador Kislyak, and Flynn tells him, well, don't don't overreact. There's a new team coming in. We're going to re-examine relations with Russia. Just don't overreact. He didn't say don't impose sanctions, reciprocal sanctions, or don't expel American diplomats. That's just don't overreact. And then the Russians said, well, that was very nice. You know what? We're not going to expel anyone. We're not going to impose any sanctions. We're not going to close down any American diplomatic compounds. In the spirit of friendship, we're going to turn the other cheek. And in fact, rather than expel American diplomats, we're going to throw open the Kremlin to American diplomats and their families, and they can enjoy Christmas festivities inside the Kremlin. So this very nice, very generous offer, in the spirit of turning the other cheek, was then seized on by the Obama people and said, we said that there was some kind of a conspiracy between Trump and Putin. That proves it. Hitherto, the Russians had always done the mirror thing, the reciprocal sanctions. If we do this to them, then they do the same thing to us. Now they haven't done it. This has never happened before. That's because there's a plot, with Trump and Putin. Therefore, we need to continue and, in fact, escalate our spying on Trump and all the people. So we've really got to do everything, to get this Russiagate investigation into high gear. And that was how the Obama people responded to this this act of generosity on the part of the Russians. So what that tells us is that if you do that, if you do the generous thing to the West, they're going to see it as something else, either a sign of weakness or that there's some deep Machiavellian thinking. It's not. It's never a good idea. Turning the other cheek. That's not. That's not how you conduct international affairs. Um, so anyway, thank you, Anne Marie. That looks really interesting. We're gonna look at that. And anything else I missed? So let me go back to our our page on YouTube, and Dr. Nostrand. Dr. Nostrand subscribed. Thank you so much, Dr. Nostrand. Really appreciate you having done this. I really generous of you. Thank you. And I think, and, as I say, anyone who subscribes to our locals community will get so much out of it. We talk about Cynthia, Marty, Robert, Stone River. I mean, they all regularly, and of course Danaki, they all regularly contribute so much to our board. They're always putting in, posting fascinating items, posting really interesting videos. So you get everything along with the movie club, the book club, everything else, but also all of the gagglers who do so much to keep our board as interesting and as enjoyable and stimulating as it is. So think thank you. My time is up. So it's Christmas Eve, almost midnight here. So again, very Merry Christmas to all Gagglers. Very Merry Christmas to everyone who joined us on this Christmas Eve. I really hope you have a wonderful day tomorrow, with family, exchanging presents, eating well, drinking well, obviously, and really in the spirit of the great, our great religious or whatever, a holiday, when we're supposed to think about, a great, the more transcendent issues. We do our politics and everything else, but we sometimes have to think about, the more transcendent moral issues. And so that tomorrow is the day for that, and then we'll be back on what used to be known as Boxing Day. I guess it still is Boxing Day in the UK. So we'll be back then. Have a great Christmas, and with friends, family, or whoever, or if you even when by yourself, just think about what the meaning of Christmas is. Think about the people for whom whose Christmas is being taken away, as we just mentioned in Syria. And we'll be back on Boxing Day on Thursday. So thank you so much for today. Thank you above all for everything that you've done over the past year. Thank you for those who have contributed so generously today. Really appreciate that. That's a very, very nice Christmas gift. And let's just forget the dogs for one day. I mean, they make life hard enough as it is. So anyway, thank you. Have a Merry Christmas. See you Thursday. All the best. Good night. Bye-bye.